Hello and welcome to the sixth and final installation of the Maynard Sudman Littleton Coin Club Littleton Coin lecture series. My name is Lane. I'm with the American Numismatic Association, and it's my privilege to introduce our curator of exhibitions, Doug Mudd, who's going to talk about his work with images and Republican sovereignty. Doug?
Thank you, Lane. Hello. This is a topic that's interested me for several years now. First got really interested in this when I was looking into the early history of the American numismatics and the development of the imagery and designs on the early coins. And what really struck me was a reference that I got at one point to Washington refusing to have his image used on U.S. coinage. This was an intriguing thought, and it led me to do some further research, and eventually I put this paper together that the lecture is based on today. Anyway, it's entitled Image and Republican Sovereignty, Negotiating the Numismatic Iconography of the Early American Republic. With that, actually. So in 1792, George Washington refused to have his name and portrait placed on the proposed coinage for the fledgling United States. He is even said to have ordered the patterns shown to him and the dies that created them destroyed. Why? Well, this question is especially interesting in light of the fact that images of Washington as founder and savior of his country were rampant throughout the new nation. Basically, you go anywhere in the United States in the period after the Revolution, and Washington is on mugs, he's in paintings, he's on popular media of all sorts. He appears everywhere. So why would it be a big deal for Washington to have his portrait on coinage? It's an interesting question. And it goes back to the ideals and thoughts and education of the people of the generation of the founding of this country. The question has become harder to answer over time in a country where the idea of placing dead presidents on coinage has become commonplace, including the placing of George Washington's bust on the U.S. quarter on the bicentennial of his birth. The meaning of the messages placed on money has lost much of its significance. This was not true in the early years of the Republic. The Founding Fathers drew on their experiences with the creation and management of currency during the Revolutionary War and the period of the Confederation in making the decision to create a new and exclusive currency for the United States. Their reasons for doing so were diverse and were influenced by the political battles of the day. But it is clear that certain messages transcended partisan politics. Most importantly, the messages conveyed by the act of issuing coinage and currency were considered important aspects of creating a national identity. During the process of creating this new monetary system, the Founding Fathers paradoxically moved from the identifiably American symbols and images to those inspired by the ancient Roman Republic. This was done in order to create a clear divide between the new national identity as outlined by the Constitution and what had gone before, economically and politically. The answer to the initial question of why George Washington refused to have his likeness placed on the new nation's coinage is to be found in the Founding Fathers' perception of the role of money, in particular in the United States during the early years of the Republic. This perception was inherited from European ideas of money that in turn derived from ancient Greek and Roman monetary concepts. The answer also lies within the politics of the time and is intimately tied in with a core problem of the period: how to create a nation out of 13 bickering former colonies. As the independence became increasingly assured, as they were winning the revolution, it became clear the Founding Fathers moved from the problems of winning to those of creating a nation. It was no longer so much of a question of how do we feed the armies and create the armies that are going to beat the British, but how do we turn this group of people into a single unitary country. In this, they were perceptive enough to realize that it would not be enough to create a sound government. They would also have to create a lasting economic and cultural bond strong enough to forge a common national identity. Various mechanisms were created to do this, drawing on the experience of pre-revolutionary and political and social organizations. Here you've got some of the early designs on revolutionary coinage based on Franklin-esque ideas of, the rings representing the joined colonies, and then we are one, and the Fugio with the time flying, so you have to seize the day and work hard, this kind of thing. These are all Franklin-esque mottos designed to encourage people to be better, to take control of their lives and do more with it, and to encourage the union of the states. Became independent. Now, the familiar coinage of the time was based on the Spanish-American dollar, the milled dollar, and this is the other pattern that most people had been used to using during the 1730s, 40s, 50s, and they were still quite common at the time of the Revolution. And this is a standard type for European coins of the time. You'd have a national coat of arms or some sort, and then another national symbol that would, in some cases, in this case, project the royal aspirations, the control of the world by the Spanish crown, in this case. Now, various mechanisms were created to try to create a national identity, drawing on the experience of the pre-revolutionary political and social organizations. Money was the one tool available to politicians that could really forge a national identity and create an authority for the new government. In the context of the new United States, money had a particular relevance for the purpose of nation building due to the diversity of the forms of circulating currency and money of account of the former colonies. Each of the colonies had previously issued their own money in one form or another, either paper money, or during the era of the Confederation, they started issuing coinage. Now, that was bad enough, having 13 different types of potential money. But it wasn't all money of the same denomination based on the same values. Each of the colonies, there was a different prevailing basis for their money. Even if they used pounds, shillings, and pence as their basic denominational system, a New Jersey pound, shilling, and pence was not the same as a North Carolina pound, shilling, and pence. And this created major problems when you were trying to trade between the colonies. It was one thing to trade with England where you only had to do one conversion. But if you had a transaction that would involve using Spanish dollars from the Caribbean, converting to English pounds, shillings, and pence in sterling, and then going to New Jersey, then to North Carolina in some way, you'd be doing all sorts of fairly complicated math to try to come up with a single value for what was going on. And it was easy to make mistakes. It was very complicated. The numismatic history of the Confederation in many ways mirrors the political history of the period. A weak central government shared coining powers with the states. The federal government lacked the power and economic means to suppress private importation and counterfeiting of token coins or to issue silver or gold coinage of its own. Robert and Governor Morrison's efforts to found a mint came to nothing during this period. The weakness of the central government resulted in economic chaos, clearly pointing out the necessity for a more powerful central government and a single national coinage if the new nation was to survive. There was a dialogue about what images were appropriate as representations of the new country. And the debate during the period of the Confederation began during the period of the Confederation and continued through the early years of the Republic. As early as 1781, Robert Morris, as the superintendent of finance, began working on plans for a new coinage, including the founding of a mint. These plans were presented to Congress for consideration on January 15th of 1782. In the meantime, many of the former colonies began to plan for and issue their own coinages, either through the creation of state minting facilities or through contracts with domestic or foreign, primarily English, private mint establishments. The only restrictions placed on the states with regards to coinage by the Articles of Confederation appeared in Article 11 and stated that the United States in Congress assembled shall also have the sole and exclusive right and power of regulating alloy and value of coins struck by their own authority or by that of the respective states. Under this article, the states were allowed to produce money on their own account as long as it followed the standards set by Congress. This was as far as the framers of the articles were willing to go in limiting states' rights, because this is the period just after the end of the Revolution. The states aren't sure exactly what their relationship to the other states are. They don't want to lose their power, and so you had to step very carefully at that point in trying to determine what the new nation was going to look like, especially in the central, the strength of the central government. This was as far as the framers of the articles were ready to go in limiting states' rights, and represented an attempt to limit the economic chaos that would be created with the issuance of 14 currencies using different standards within the new nation. By this time, Vermont had become a state as well, and therefore you had 14 rather than 13 political entities vying for their own piece of the pie, so to speak. This experiment ended in 1788 with the collapse of public confidence in the state-issued coppers, which had merely exacerbated the economic problems of the Confederation. This monetary chaos created an opportunity for a new national money to have an especially important role in the creation of a national identity. In order to do so, however, the national money would have to be accepted by the citizens of the nation and must be stable enough to encourage trade and investment. If it did so successfully, the new money would generate popularity for the government. So this is very important to stabilize the government as well as the economy, because if you've got money that's not working, that's a total loss to the people using it, confidence in the government naturally is going to get eroded. In a situation where you've got a brand new government that doesn't have a whole lot of cachet as far as popularity and a good record of stability and good lawmaking, it's very difficult. So that money becomes that much more important. Here in this slide, we have some examples of the different coinages. We've got Massachusetts, where you see the eagle. This is following some of the consensus that's beginning to develop. There's a dialogue going on about what should be on U.S. coinage, and the eagle had already appeared as a prime candidate for being used on U.S. coinage as a national symbol. So you see this on Massachusetts. You see the Vermont copper, and it's got a design that's related to a design that was proposed for U.S. coinage, which we'll talk about a little later. And then you've got the New York Clinton copper here. The next one. The images and messages on the currency would serve through their daily usage as conveyors of patriotic messages designed to promote the ideals of the new nation as physical signs of its stability and economic strength. This is back to the idea that sovereignty, coinage, money represents the calling card of a new country. This is an ideal that's been around since very shortly after coinage was invented. If you issue coinage in the name of a country, that shows that that country is independent, has sovereign power. In linking the creation of a national identity and economic stability with a unified national coinage, the Founding Fathers were not drawing from recent experience alone. They drew heavily on the models provided by the ancient Roman Republic, as represented by philosophers such as John Locke and the historians of the ancient world such as Edward Gibbon and his contemporaries. Washington himself was heavily influenced by the example of the ancient Republican Roman statesmen. Their code of conduct can be seen in his political actions, particularly with reference to the ideal of the subordination of the military to the civilian in politics, and the primacy of the welfare of the republic over personal ambition. George Washington was proverbial for his concern that the military leaders were not in control of the politics. That was very important, and that the welfare of the new nation was more important than any individual's ambition of any type. These are ideas that were brought about by the education system of the time, where elites were educated in Latin, in Roman history, and particularly Roman Republican history was popular at the time through the various philosophers. John Locke was extremely popular, and it created this intellectual climate of belief in individual liberties, in the ideal of a government that was not run as an authoritarian government run through God as the ordainer of a monarch, this kind of thing. Even though England had a monarch, they had a successful system of parliamentary politics, and therefore that imbued itself on the American consciousness as well. They were used to that concept, but they'd gone through a series of abuses. Okay, the ongoing struggles and developments in France served as models for the American leaders. Revolutionary France provides an example of the importance of the messages and symbolism on coinage to 18th century elites. French coinage of the period from 1787 through 1812 follows closely the political changes occurring in the government of the country. And let's see if we can find that. And here, this is a wonderful series of coins that really do tell you the story of what's going on. These coins reflect the political story of the French Revolution very closely, and are a great source of evidence for the importance that the people of the time, especially the elites, gave to the coinages, the messages on the coins, the imagery, and the actual written legends on them. Here you have an earlier coin from 1784 of Louis XVI as the King of France. The legend reads, Louis XVI, by the grace of God, France and Navarre king. So he's a king of two geographic places, locations. Next, the revolution has occurred. The monarchy, the absolute monarchy has been abolished, and you have a constitutional monarchy. The symbolism on here is fantastic in that you've got still the head of the king, because he is the head of state, but then you also have down below, you've got a winged figure representing liberty, and she is writing upon a tablet a constitution. So this is a constitutional monarchy. The king is limited by the law. So law is primary. So you've got Louis XVI, king. So he's not, they're French now, not in Latin. He's king of the French people, des François. This is an interesting title. He's not king of France, the geographic location. He's king of the people. This suggests that the people are important. And it's the reine de la loi. So it's the reign of the law. So the law is actually in charge here. Well, Louis defects. He tries to escape France. He's called a traitor when he's captured, and he's executed. They take the reverse of the previous coin, which is also interesting in the symbol. When you see the rooster, for example, the rooster represents vigilance. When you have a revolution and you have a government that's being run by the people or by the representatives of the people, you have to be very vigilant to make sure that the freedom and liberty survive. And this is what the rooster represents. And then you've got the fasces. So this is an ancient republican symbol from Rome. So the Romans used the fasces as a symbol of the ancient republic. So they're drawing back to the ancient times. They're drawing connections with the most famous and successful republic that anyone of the time knows of. And then you've got the liberty cap on the end of a pole at the top of, that goes through the fasces. Again, the liberty cap is a wonderful symbol of freedom from slavery. So the slavery of being chained to an absolute monarch, moving forward to having a representative government in which the people do have a say in how their government is run. The liberty cap was an ancient symbol that when a slave was freed, they would wear this cap as a symbol of their freedom, and that's why it was adopted in the modern age. Now, you have the reverse of the coin, the previous coin being used as the reverse, and then it's again the reign of the law, and it's the République Française. So it's the Republic of the French people. Interesting, they've also changed the date. They're using a dating system based on the end of the monarchy. It gets complicated in here because they use two different systems. One was the first year of liberty, and then the first year of the republic, different things. In any case, the series continues, and now by this time we're up to 1801 here, and there's been a change. The French have gone through the revolution. They've gone through the period of the terror, and there's been bloodshed everywhere. Excesses have occurred. They found out that freedom and liberty are not enough. You have to have some control over this freedom and liberty. Otherwise, things get really bad really quick. So now you've got union et force, so a motto that's talking about the union of the country and the strength of the country. And you've got Hercules with justice and liberty. Now Hercules is standing behind them with his arms over them. And the suggestion of this design is very much that you need to have a strong central force to keep, you want liberty and justice in there, but you need to keep them under control. And this imagery really evokes that sense. And it follows very closely what was going on at the time. The Republic is giving way to the Directory. You've got Napoleon is starting to make his impression politically, and instead of the sort of chaos that was prevalent previously, things are starting to tighten up a bit. It's also interesting that the Republic is no longer the Republic of the French people. It is now the French Republic, République Française. This is an interesting concept. It's the French Republic that is now more important than the people. It's an entity in and of itself. It's not made up of the people so much as it is an entity of its own. And then you go on to Napoleon Bonaparte, who becomes the first consul, and it's still the French Republic. Interestingly, there's a coin in between this one and the last one, which couldn't locate, but you have the first consul as the leader of the French Republic. This is actually part of Roman tradition, so it's okay because the Roman Republic was always led by two consuls. The next coin would have shown the Napoleon as the emperor of the French Republic, which is a little interesting because that doesn't make much sense. You know, an emperor of an empire, sure, but it does reflect the political reality of the time. Politically, they had not changed the Republic empire, and therefore it was technically accurate, even if it didn't make any logical sense. And then eventually you got around to the legal aspects of the coinage and the political situation catching up to what had occurred, and Napoleon becomes the emperor of the First French Empire. This is a very interesting series. It really does show how the French were looking at the important images. It reflects also what the Americans were thinking at the same time. Actually, this covers a wide range, a little wider range than the development of the American Republic, but the concepts are the same, and then people are going through the same intellectual process. So, in the United States, national imagery based on the classical themes eventually prevailed over those previously used by the Continental Congress and the various states for their coinages and paper money. This was partly a result of the need to form a break with the past. The forms and images of the Revolution and Confederation were discredited due to hyperinflation, massive counterfeiting, and economic depression.
That's why. The last coin was an emperor of Europe? Is it EUR?
No, let's see. Previous. So, more importantly, it was also the result of a attempt to appropriate the trappings of legitimacy to the new nation by borrowing from the illustrious past. So the idea was that all these designs and coinages and paper money from the revolutionary period had been discredited. The revolutionary paper money, the continental dollar, in the end, it wasn't until after 1810 that if you ended up holding revolutionary currency, you were stuck until that time. And when you did get repaid, you got paid something like 1 cent on the dollar. So you not only did you lose a lot of money, you had to wait 30, 40 years to get paid back. It wasn't an auspicious start to creating economic stability. The copper coinage of the Confederation created the same dislocation and economic discomfort, to say the least. And so the idea was that they had to come up with something new, something that would be visibly different and more stable, hopefully. And so they came up with designs based on the use of liberty and the eagle. And this is some of the uses that liberty was put on coinage. Now, we'll go back to discussing what exactly led to the designs that were used. There's a whole process. This was not a simple decision that was made by a few people in a committee. There was a long, difficult process that Congress and individuals on various committees from out of Congress went through to come up with the designs. Now, Benjamin Franklin was involved in this process, and he was involved in the printing of paper money from the 1750s, well, from the 1730s and even into the 20s, and had been influential in the choice of designs for continental paper money. As early as 1779, while he was the minister plenipotentiary to the court of France, Benjamin Franklin began to explore the possibilities for creating a new American coinage. In a letter to his friend, the English coiner Edward Brigden, Franklin proposed a plan for obtaining coinage via contract for the new nation. In this letter, he outlined designs that he felt would be most appropriate for the new nation. Instead of, and this is a quote, instead of repeating continually upon every halfpenny the dull story that everybody knows, that George III is King of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, etc., Franklin's designs would consist of some important proverb of Solomon, some pious moral, prudential economic precept on one side. Franklin hoped that the prudential mottos would serve as a moral guide to the users of the coins as they would be seen each time a coin was used. And so we go back to this original slide where this is very Franklin-esque in its concept. You have these mottos and designs that are new designs. They're not drawing on ancient history. They are using Latin, but that was typical for the time. They're also using English, and they're very evocative and would speak to the people of the time in a modern way. They're designed to be messages to be read and hopefully used. Something like the mottos that he was continually putting into Poor Richard's almanac and things like this sort. This kind of thinking was quite popular, and there was a large group that favored coinage with this kind of imagery and kinds of messages. Franklin thus believed that the messages on coins were important and could be used to influence people, in this case to live better lives and make them better citizens. His ideas did continue to appear on a few coins during the period, in particular on the Fujio cent of 1787, on which we see the chain of 13 links surrounding the legend of the United States, in turn surrounding the motto, "We are one." This is the same as the continental dollar, which we have here. Another example is the Birch cent, produced in 1792. Now this, on this coin, we have Lady Liberty in deference to Washington's wishes, because he thought Lady Liberty would be a much better image to use than any other, particularly any of an individual in charge of the country as president. And it has the motto, "Liberty, parent of science and industry." Again, this is a very Franklin-esque motto. I had a discussion recently on this with Senator Daschle. Actually used this coin. This is a Smithsonian coin in a talk that he made to the group of scientists. And when I talked to his assistant, unfortunately, they fixated on this coin because they'd heard about it and seen it. President Clinton had actually held this up at one of his press conferences at one point. And unfortunately, they misunderstood the meaning of the motto because they took science to literally mean science the way we mean it today, when actually the motto in the language of the time is "Liberty, parent of science and industry." Well, science is the use of logic, the use of knowledge to improve how you do things, and industry is work, the work ethic, this kind of thing. So it's actually, be productive and be efficient in your productivity, as opposed to using science in the way we think of it in industry, as in factories. It changes the meaning of the motto quite a bit if you use a modern version of this versus the intentional meaning of the time. Now, what's also interesting, this coin reflects the legal requirements that Congress placed on the coinage after this debate that we're going to talk about in a second. The coin has an image of liberty. It has 1 cent on it, United States of America, and the date. And in order to make sure that you knew what this coin was, because a decimal coinage system was new for the United States at the time, it's a 1 cent coin, which is 1/100th of a dollar. So they actually make it very obvious. A watershed event for the eventual appearance of U.S. coinage was the creation of the Great Seal of the United States in 1782. The heraldry of the seal was to have immediate influence on the imagery of U.S. coins and paper money, an influence that continues to this day. The most obvious borrowing from the seal has been the use of the eagle as a symbol for American strength and independence. The first serious attempt to create a federal mint began in 1782, when Robert Morris, as a superintendent of the Treasury, presented a plan devised by his assistant, Governor Morris. The new coinage was designed to produce a common link between the state currencies of account through the use of a monetary unit divisible into all of them. So we had all these 13 different colonies, and then eventually 14 different states with different monies of account. They all had different values, even though they were expressed in the same denominations. It made accounting chaotic, especially when you're trying to create a single nation and create laws for interstate commerce. You try to simplify interstate commerce to encourage the unity of the country and create barriers to the outside world. Well, it was very difficult to do under those circumstances. So Governor Morris came up with the Nova Constellatio pattern coins. Now, in this proposal, Morris revealed that his primary interest in creating a mint was commercial, understandable since he was a merchant and a prime mover in establishing the finances of the new republic on a sound footing by establishing the Bank of North America. So this is a major financier. A national mint would save the government an estimated $30,000 lost each year due to the importation of counterfeit English halfpence, and it would provide the nation with a uniform currency. So this is his primary motive. He wants to create an economic solution to a problem that is costing the country a lot of money. The problem was that despite its ingenuity, the plan was possibly the most mathematically cumbersome system ever devised for coinage. It was based on creating a common denominator among the diverse currencies of the states in a misguided attempt to reconcile the competing interests of the states. So each of the states were competing and no one wanted to give up their particular denomination. So he said, rather than get everybody to agree on something that they probably won't agree on, why don't we just create a single coinage that allows them to all fit into this new system. The system required the creation of a unit equal to 1/1440th, so 1,440th of a Spanish dollar, or 1/1600 part of an English crown, a 5-shilling coin. Morris's designs for coinage appeared on the Nova Constellatio pattern coins of 1783, as you see here. These consisted of 13 stars representing the 13 original states in a field surrounding the all-seeing eye of God on the obverse, with the motto Nova Constellatio, the new constellation, and on the reverse, the words Libertas and Justitia, so liberty and justice, around a wreath, which in turn surrounds the letters US. A number represents the value of the coin in units, starting with 5 and moving up to the 1,000 unit coin. And in this case, they don't have the number on them, but that was the plan. The reference to a new constellation comes from the resolution of the Second Continental Congress in June 4th of 1777, laying out the design for the flag of the United States, in which the stars on the blue field are described as a new constellation. This was a new nation among the constellation of nations in the world. In the end, the fatal flaw, as pointed out by Thomas Jefferson, was that the system's complexity was designed to reconcile the old state systems it was to replace. Once it had replaced these, there was no rational reason to continue using such a cumbersome system. So, you're going to take all the state coinages, make the states happy with the idea of doing this by creating a system that can incorporate all of them. But once you've done that, why do you need such a complex system? It doesn't make any sense. And especially since none of the proposed denominations for the new coinage approximated any commonly used coins of the time. They weren't like the Spanish dollar, which in fact was the coinage that everybody was using, either it or its fractions. So you'd have to create a whole new system, and this would have been a huge burden because it would require that any new mint that was established would have to produce enough coins almost from the get-go to replace all the other coins around. And that just wasn't going to happen. That was a monumental task that wasn't going to work. So in the meantime, you'd have a period of up to a decade where you'd be converting English coins, Spanish coins, the new coins, which are totally unfamiliar, and it would just increase the chaos. After his election to Congress in June of 1783, Jefferson served as chairman on the Currency Committee, where he learned of Morris's proposal and soon presented Morris a plan of his own. This was not the first time Jefferson was on a Congressional Currency Committee. His first experience had been in 1776 at the time of the first abortive attempt to create a U.S. mint. At that time, he proposed that a coinage for the United States follow a decimal format for simplicity and as an expression of independence. For Jefferson, coinage provided another vehicle for for declaring America's independence, not only from Great Britain, but also from Europe, through the establishment of a rational system of weights and measures based on the decimal system. This rationalization would follow the precepts of Newtonian physics, reflecting Jefferson's preoccupation with numbers and his belief that science and government are inextricably related. You know, if you use science, if you use progress and logic and a system of weights and measures and everything that made sense, rather than the older systems that were prevalent throughout Europe at the time, that would help and make better any government that you organize, because by using logic and science to improve the way men are organized, this would improve naturally the way they live. And Jefferson would create a new currency from scratch, not only for the sake of simplicity, but also to distance America from Europe and create a system that would be conducive to a republican government. So if you educate people properly, they will be democratic in their thoughts and principles. On January 8th, 1790, President Washington urged Congress at the opening of its second session that uniformity in the currency, weights and measures of the United States is an object of great importance and will, I am persuaded, be duly attended to. With this encouragement, the House requested Thomas Jefferson, now Secretary of State, to prepare a plan for a national coinage. Washington was aware of the economic problems, and he was trying to push Congress forward to solve the problem. Congress was reluctant because it took a lot of political maneuvering and deal-making to try to get this done. Jefferson was chosen for this project because of his previous involvement in the monetary affairs and his contacts with foreign coin manufacturers. At this point, they weren't sure that they wanted a national mint. And so Jefferson had been working with various English and French designers and also manufacturers, partly in developing ideas for how to produce national coinage, and also on his own. On January 15th, Jefferson took this opportunity to argue once again to have a national mint established, and presented a detailed plan on April 14, 1790, in which he laid out arguments against the latest plan for contract coinage and for the establishment of a national mint. Contract coinage had been used previously, in particular with the Fugio cent, and this had created an economic disaster because Jarvis, who had been in charge of that project, was taking bribes in order to decide who was going to end up with a contract. They ended up making a contract which was designed to produce, I believe it was 1 million cents, and they only produced about 350,000. And Jarvis ended up with a suspiciously large extra amount of money of his own, and this created a major scandal, and also discredited the Fugio cent and caused the government quite a bit of trouble. Now, Jefferson's first and foremost argument for a national mint was that coinage is particularly an attribute of sovereignty. To transfer its exercise into another country is to submit it to another sovereign. So in other words, if you, in this case, the discussion was about Matthew Boulton and his minting facilities in England to produce coinage for the United States. What happens if you're at war with England? Jefferson was a Francophile and an Anglophobe. He did not like the British and did not trust them, and this led him further along the line of, it's likely we're going to have a war with England. What happens with our coinage if we can't get it shipped because our manufacturing plant happens to be in the country we're fighting against? A logical problem. He went on to argue that only by having a mint of its own can the United States ensure its freedom, as the ability to produce coinage constitutes one of the sinews of war. It's almost as important as being able to make your own weapons and produce and train fighting men. The result of Jefferson's report was a House directive to the Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, to prepare a plan for the establishment of a mint. This he did and presented the report to Congress on January 28, 1791. Hamilton's report covered in detail the establishment of the denominations of the new coinage and the weights and fineness of metal for each. Despite the issuance of Congress continued to delay, mainly because there were still congressmen interested in pursuing the profits available from a contract copper coinage, regardless of the Jarvis fiasco with the Fugio cents. So there were still guys out there who were hoping to be able to manage a contract like this in which they could enrich themselves as well as the nation. After corresponding with Jefferson, Washington once again stepped in with a reminder to Congress on October 25, 1791, that, and I quote, "the disorders in the existing currency, and especially the scarcity of small coinage, a scarcity so peculiarly distressing to the poorer classes, strongly recommend the carrying into immediate effect the resolution already entered into concerning the establishment of a mint. Measures have been taken pursuant to that resolution for procuring some of the most necessary artists, together with requisite apparatus." On October 31st, 1791, the Senate appointed a committee with Robert Morris as its chair to present a bill for the establishment of a federal mint. Come on. In the meantime, coin contractors, in particular, two English private mints, continued to make proposals to Congress for the issuance of copper coinages, often with the inclusion of sample patterns to key members of the Senate or the House. It was one of these pieces with his bust that was passed into the hands of George Washington, eliciting the response narrated at the beginning of this paper. So here's an example of the type of bust that he might have been shown. And this is a pattern proposal here. And it's too monarchical, and you can see when we compare it with the further slides here. Here's examples of what our coinage could have looked like. And it's interesting to compare them with earlier coins. Here's an Augustale of Frederick II as the King of Sicily. Now, this is one of the first gold coinages to be reintroduced into the European world, and it's heavily based on Roman models, but it's very interesting when you compare it with the previous one here. When you compare it with that, it's actually a very similar piece. So you can understand why it might be called too monarchical. The history of these monarchical images, the Romans had dealt with this same problem in that at the time when the Romans began issuing coinages, the principal coinages of their were the coinages of the Greek empires. These are the successor states to the conquest of Alexander the Great, and you would have images of Alexander the Great, Ptolemy I, and Antiochus I, all Hellenistic kings. This is the kind of thing that the Romans were reacting to when they created that tradition of, if you put a man's image on the coinage, that means that they're a king, and a republic cannot have a king. That's against the principles of a republic. You cannot show a living individual on your coinage. And the coins that were prevalent at the time of the Revolution, at the time that the United States was going through the Confederation and trying to decide what it was going to do with coinage, were of this same type. Here you have the monarch, and then you have a national coat of arms with a crown, very clearly the product of a monarchy. The important thing here is to identify who is responsible for the coinage. It's the king, and that they are in charge of the country. And you have England. This is slightly later, but it's a really nice coin, so I thought that would go in there. It also does come to the point of showing you an English coin with the same sort of pattern going on. There's the monarch and a symbol representative of the nation under the king. And then On January 12, 1792, the Senate passed a bill authored by Robert Morris for the establishment of a federal mint. The bill established the following design for the coinage. Upon one side of each of the said coins there shall be on all the impression or representation of the head of the President of the United States for the time being, with an inscription which shall express the initial or first letter of his Christian or first name and his surname at length, the succession of the presidency numerically, and the year of the coinage. At this point, Morris's production of pattern coins backfired, as the coins had Washington's image on them and proved to be an embarrassment when heated debate erupted in the House over monarchical coinage, which was very similar to that appearing on the English patterns, the token patterns and patterns that had been sent by the English companies. American coinage had come the full circle, from domestically produced coinages with homegrown designs and expressing defiance against Great Britain or Franklin-like pious homilies, enjoining their readers to improve themselves through thrift and good behavior, to designs heavily influenced by contemporary European coinage, with a bust of the ruler and their titles, along with the name of the nation which they ruled, which is something that you see with these coins. These patterns are very similar to the prevailing types of the time. This is what Washington was objecting to. This is a republic, not a monarchy, and it should have images that reflect Republican values. This, as the story about Washington at the start of the paper suggests, was not good enough. This new nation, this republic, in a world of monarchies and empires, must be represented in a way that clearly declared to the world the principles for which it stands. Thus, the House passed a motion to replace the offending section as being monarchical. The alternate wording proposed by the House was, I quote, "Upon one side of each of the said coins there shall be an impression emblematic of liberty, with an inscription of the word liberty and the year of the coinage." The motion was seconded by John Page, a Democrat Republican from Virginia who had served under Washington during the French and Indian Wars. Page argued, and I quote, that it had been the practice of monarchies to exhibit figures or heads of their kings upon their coins. We have all read that the Jews paid tribute to the Romans by means of a coin on which was the head of Caesar. And this does not have the head of Caesar, but by that they mean the head of the reigning emperor. Now, as we have no occasion for this aid to history or any pretense to call the money of the United States the money of our presidents, there can be no sort of necessity for adopting the idea of the Senate. I am certain that it will be more agreeable to the citizens of the United States to use the head of liberty on their coin than the heads of presidents. However well pleased they might be with the head of the great man, now their president, referring to Washington, they may have no great reason to be pleased with some of his successors, as we all know to be true. They have his busts, his pictures everywhere. Historians are daily celebrating his fame, and Congress have voted him a monument. Representative Hugh Williamson supported Page by affirming that the Romans did not put heads of their consuls on their money, that Julius Caesar wished to have his on the Roman coin, but only ventured to cause the figure of an elephant to be impressed thereon. And this is the coin that he's referring to. So this is in the congressional record. They were aware of Republican Roman coinages of the time, and they were aware of the meaning and import of these images. These are important to represent, to speak of what the nation stands for. That by a pun on the Carthaginian name of that animal, the elephant, which sounded like the name of Caesar, he might be said to be on the coin. So in this case, he's not technically putting his name on there, though we all know that his name was Caesar. Technically, he could say, oh, well, that's the Carthaginian name for elephant, so it's okay. I'm not really referring to myself. He would get himself into trouble later, as we know, as he tried to put his image on the coinage, and for his troubles and because of the enemies he had made along the way, he was killed for it. So the Romans thought it was a very important principle. The opposition, led by Representative Livermore, ridiculed the idea that the liberty of the people of the United States could be affected by having an image of the president on the coins. What does it matter if you have a image of a guy on a coin. That doesn't matter at all. Representative Smith of South Carolina used the example of French coinage to show that republics could indeed place the images of their chief magistrate on their coins. Now this is interesting because this is back to those French coins again. Slide with Napoleon on it as the consul and then the emperor of the French Republic. This is not the best examples to use. In this case, actually what they're referring to is the French king, so Louis XVI, as a constitutional monarch of a republic. Well, the result of that was not all that great, but they didn't know it at the time. You know, Louis would get his head chopped off and they would change that. Still, they're using what they were aware of at the time, and so using contemporary politics, they were able to point to France and say, look, they think it's okay to use the head of a person, the head of the state on Republican type coinage. Why can't we? The motion to strike out the Senate's prescription for the coin design and another to replace it with the words emblematic of liberty with an inscription of the word liberty were both carried. So what happened was the House took the Senate's idea for what U.S. coinage should look like and sent it back to them with this critical change. We're not going to have the head of the president on our coins, nor will we have their name and their sequential number. This is all too reminiscent of the monarchical coinage of the time. The amended bill was sent to the Senate on March 26, which objected and immediately returned it to the House, basically that same afternoon. So they just sent it back, and the House was faced with another argument. In the ensuing debate on the same day, Representative John Francis Mercer argued that Washington needed no honors of a kind that were awarded to such infamous men as Caligula, Nero, and Heliogabalus, all Roman emperors, all who had their portraits on coins. So he was comparing them with some of the worst of the Roman emperors, and why would you want to compare Washington to them? We don't want Washington as a dictator or a tyrant. Representative Egbert Benson argued in favor of the Senate with the observation that plain pieces of metal will not answer for money. Some impression is necessary to guard against counterfeits. The Senate have determined what the device shall be, but the House, by their amendment, have left the matter to the artist, who may form such an emblem as suits his fancy. He went on to ridicule the idea of the people being enslaved by the image of their president on the coinage. Well, he was right in one sense, as we saw in that earlier slide. Let's see. As we saw in the earlier slide, the Liberty did proceed to have a number of different guises over the next 150 years that she was used as the primary image on the obverse of U.S. coinages. We have seated liberty, cap bust, flowing hair, all these different versions. So he was right on that. The artist would take their artistic license and create different versions of liberty. But I believe he was very wrong at that time in the critical period of creating the new nation, of the idea that having the image of the president would not affect how the nation and how the people thought of the nation was formed. I can only imagine if Jackson himself had been on the coinage, that may have grown his ego even a further amount and created some problems for the Constitution. But afterwards, Representative Page supported Mercer with another speech in which he stated, and I quote, "He was sorry to find that some gentlemen endeavored to ridicule Republican cautions. He confessed that as long as the people were sensible of the blessings of liberty and had their eyes open to watch encroachments, they would not be enslaved. But if they should ever shut them or become inattentive to their interests and the true principles of a free government, they, like other nations, might lose their liberties. That it was the duty of the members of that House to keep the eyes of their constituents open and to watch over their liberties. With this view, he warned his constituents of the danger not merely of imitating the flattery and almost idolatrous practices of the monarchies with respect to the honor paid to their kings, but This indiscriminate honor is unworthy of the president's acceptance. As a friend to the president, I am unwilling to offer him a compliment which, if accepted, might damn his reputation. Were I in his place, I would cut off my hand rather than it should sign the act as it now stands. So this is a very interesting and very strong commentary. You know, this is very important to Representative Page and to others of his thinking, that the images really do have an important effect on the perception of the country. What's also interesting with his comments is he's also asserting the superiority of a republic over monarchies, which is also another ancient Republican Roman idea.